everyone, let's wrap up May. I didn't upload many videos, only my letter to May. Thank you all for your nice comments already. And I knew work was going to be busy, so I'm very surprised as to how much I read additionally to being busy with work all the time and pretty knackered. A lot of them were audiobooks and rereads, but it was really fun. So let's start and go through the books in a random order I wrote them down. So let's start with the Book of Form and Emptiness. It's a big chunker, it took me a while, it had some dips and some parts I was just like, I don't think I get what I'm reading, and I kept forgetting. Other parts I just flew through. The book is told in varying different styles of narration, and it mainly follows a young boy who hears things talk, and mostly he talks to the book that is narrating his life. So the story is told by the young boy and also by its book with different perspectives that explains about the life of the boy. And we also get perspectives of some of his friends and his family. We get the backstory of his family, and also his mother is kind of a little bit of a mess, and she starts reading a book on decluttering, so we often also get snippets out of that book. And it is very captivating despite dragging at some points. I really enjoyed reading this book, but I can understand that it's not for everyone. So if you struggle with magical realism, if you struggle with the idea of a book telling you the story of the narrator, of the person it's talking about, so if that puts you off, don't pick up the book. But I would recommend giving it a go. If you're interested in it, just sample the book. If you're scared of picking up a big book, you're not sure if it's going to be for you. But I highly enjoyed it. Then I read 4 books in the Singing Hills cycle. 3 of those, Book 1, Book 2, and Book 3, were rereads, but this time on audio, and I really enjoyed the audio production. It was very fast and easy to listen to. It was so nice to revisit the stories on audio and just fly through them in one listen and just pick up things I forgot and hadn't noticed before. I really liked that this month with all the rereads I did on audio, that I noticed different things that I hadn't noticed when I read them before. Then in May, the 5th book in the Singing Hills cycle was published, The Brides of High Hill, and I devoured that as an ebook, and I really enjoyed this. So if you don't know, so the Singing Hills cycle is a series of novellas following cleric Nghi. He's working for the Singing Hills monastery, I think. And you could think of it as an archive for history. The clerics go around with recording bird, so it's a magic bird that has flawless memory and can talk. They go around the country and observe things, pick up stories and archive them for history's sake, or just for archiving the lives, the stories of the country. And each book or novella focuses on a certain event that the cleric is going to, or that happens to the cleric. And in the 5th book, we follow him onto a marriage, and it starts off in the wagon with the bride, and they're going to the marriage, and you know something is off, but you're not completely sure, and you're drawn into this trying to figure out what is going on. And the twists and turns were really surprising this time, so I really enjoyed this. The books all deal with storytelling, different perspectives, and how stories can be perceived differently depending on who tells the story, what perspective is taken, and what the narrator of the story wants to tell. The Brides of High Hill deal a lot with camouflaging, illusions, lies, things like that. I really enjoyed this. If you haven't started on this series, I highly recommend that. Okay, next is some non-fiction. I listened to An Edited Life, and I was feeling a little bit like I need a motivation to do something and to get a kickstart in getting things done, because too many things needed to happen in May and I was lethargic. So An Edited Life was not a good book for me. I kind of think it was a little bit the tone of the book that didn't work for me, and also it was too much beginner when it comes to organization, decluttering, and things like that. I felt while listening that this, while it might not be for me and put me off in some parts. It might be very interesting for people in their early 20s just moving out, starting their own life, because there's a huge section on cleaning and also cleaning utensils, what you need for what, and also budgeting, and very detailed on her budgeting, the authors. And so it could help a lot of people. It didn't really have that much new information if you've been decluttering or organized or moved out of your home for a while and had to have your life together a little bit and you don't feel completely lost, then I think this might not be the best book to start. But if you're looking for a starter book to get into organization and decluttering and basically building a life, this might be a good book that you can hand out. Going in the line of nonfiction and looking for a way to become less of a mess or keep it on top of this month, real self-care is something that was pushed onto me, and it sounded interesting, but it also, I'm not really sure if I like it or if I don't like it, if I needed it, but I definitely know I didn't do what it asked to do. The idea behind the book is that there is faux self-care and real self-care, calling like yoga and the bubble bath and that stuff faux self-care in a way that it's just superficial and it's not dealing with the real problems, but it just might you feel better. So it's not shaming you for doing that, so that's good. It's always talking about that if that's helping, it's good, but it's not a solution in dealing with the systematic problems or the bigger problems underlying the exhaustion that you feel. So there are different areas that the book addresses and different tasks and jobs you have to do and things you have to face in order to do real self-care. And it is very honest about the background of the narrator and author, and also about the hard work that you have to put in if you want to do the real self-care, and partly its boundaries and all these things. And it is all well narrated, but I do not recommend the audiobook because it really is more a hands-on sit down and work with it book. And I also had the feeling, which annoyed me at some point, I often feel that lately, that you get these books that are addressed to overwhelmed mothers and working mothers and people who have to deal with demanding families and are basically used and abused in their time and energy by their family, and they don't have the feeling of being enough for them, and so just do more. And sort of, that's not me. I don't have a family that's demanding anything of me. I don't have my own family, like I'm not married and I don't have kids, so the problems I have are just the work-related things are stressing me and everything is exhausting, but I don't have all the other stuff around there, which sometimes makes me feel bad for not being happy-dappy with just work, because I don't have to deal with all the other things I don't actually know how people deal with on top of all those things. But kudos to you if you do, and if you're interested, it is a good book. It has some ideas, but it really demands attention and work from you to really get the benefit of the things she suggested. The next book, I actually had to look up what it was about. I loved it while I was listening to it. I flew through Songs of Silver Flame Like Night. Yes, I listened to it on audio. I never saw the title. Sometimes it's hard to remember the titles when you don't have them on a book cover every day that you pick it up. But I really liked it. I liked the narration, I liked the audiobook, I liked the story, but just now writing down the books, I was like, what was it actually about? And it's the first book in a series where we're in, I forgot the name of the country, let's call it something in Asia, and some white devils came and invaded and colonized, sort of like China and the British, but it's not China and the British, it's fantasy, but it's along those lines. There is some magic that the ancient people of this country had in their bones. I forgot what they called it. You know, I really forgot all the details about the book, but we're following a young woman who was basically lost her mother to a magician of the white angels or devils, and then she was orphaned, and now I think she's a singing girl working in a sort of brothel, but she hasn't been sold yet, so her first time is expensive, you know the deal. And she is trying to figure out what that strange symbol is she has on her wrist that no one can see but her. And then there's this other man coming and looking for something else, but is stumbling over her and discovering her, and he immediately knows what that is, can see the symbol, and they become friends. And there is this story of epic proportion of them going back to where he came from, where the people teach the magic, but it's all hidden and concealed, and the white devils are trying to catch her and follow her and colonizing stuff. And it is really, really captivating. I know I'm doing a bad job of describing it. It's the first in, I hope, a duology. I ran out of credits this month, so I couldn't buy the second one, but I'm going to listen to that in June. But this story follows alternating those two characters, and they have to deal with hardship and demons, and also what's the right decision to do. There's a little bit of a romance, and then the book ends, not a spoiler, but there's a third perspective of a character we haven't met before, just thrown in the last chapter, putting in something really, really dramatic, and you're like, oh my god, this is leveled up. And I enjoyed this. I know I'm doing a bad job. Read the synopsis. If the synopsis is interesting to you, go for the book. And the audiobook really, really was a blast. I just couldn't stop listening. Then I also reread or re-listened of Dragon's Feast and Murders. This is a spin-off series or novella from the Dominion of the Fallen series, and there were two main characters that I really like about the series in general, and they have to go back to the dragon world or the dragon kingdom underwater in the Seine, and there is New Year's celebration, so the dragon prince has to go see his family. He's not very excited. The angel husband he has is like, okay, I'll come along, but it's going to be boring. And so there's family drama a little bit, but mostly there's been a murder, and they're investigating and trying to find out what's going on. And really interesting story. I liked the audiobook retelling. Like I said before, I discovered things I hadn't noticed before, and it was really nice to revisit the story like that. Going back to physical books, the Kamogawa Food Detectives is a quick read. It's 6 stories of this little restaurant that goes and finds your nostalgic food. So if you remember something you ate as a kid and you want to relive that memory and eat that food again, but there's not really an option and you don't really remember all the details, you can go to the Kamogawa Food Detectives and they will find the food. The stories are very cozy. You get the beginning where the person comes to the restaurant and then they talk about what they are looking for, and then the search part and the finding part, not in there. It's just the second time the person comes back 2 weeks later mostly and eats the food, and there's a lot of nostalgia created around eating it. And so it's really fun. It's really fast stories. I constantly had to think of this Japanese series, Midnight Diner, where there's also this diner and every episode focuses a little bit on the food, but also the regulars. It was really fun. So I enjoyed that. Then I listened to Pride and Prejudice, narrated by Rosamund Pike. And I'm not particularly a big fan of the narration, but it was for free in the Audible Plus catalog, so no complaints there. I really enjoyed revisiting the story, and oh, it was so much fun to see and listen to the things and go with the stories. And like I said, picking up things that I don't pick up when I read them. So much fun. Why is my battery flashing? I still have 1, 2, 3 books. Okay, re-listened on A Red Station Drifting. This is part of the Wuja universe that Aliette de Bodard created, and we follow a former magistrate who's on the run from the government, and she hides on a station, but she's not very welcome there, but it's family. And I remembered the first time I read it, I was a little bit confused and didn't really know, get along with the book completely perfectly. And I was reminded that that was because I didn't really care about the characters. It's a lot of flawed and awful characters who are very selfish and sort of make it work. The story is rather interesting and easy to follow, but yeah, it's hard to be rooting for any of the characters. And then I started rereading The Heaven Official's Blessing. I finished book 1. This is the adventures of the god and ghost king who in the beginning meet and become friends and solve mysteries, but then the story develops to more. But in the first book, they are just going on some adventures, solving mysteries and things like that. I'm currently almost done with listening to Wuthering Heights. This is also a reread. I want to include it here because I probably will finish today and I don't want to talk about it in June. I don't have much to say about it other than I do enjoy the narration of the audiobook, and it is nice to go into the book knowing that it's not a love story. The first time I read it, I was under the false impression that it's this great love story between Heathcliff and Catherine, but it's not. It's more of a abusive, possessive kind of love story, and not even the love story is the center of the book. There are parts of their romance, but most of it is just people being awful to each other and the repercussions of their failed relationship and abusive relationship and what happens to the characters afterwards and to the people who are related to them. And I enjoy it better than the first time. Knowing it's about awful people helps a lot if you read a book about awful people, but I don't think I'm going to enjoy it much or understand why it's so important. My battery died, so finishing this up on my phone. Like I said, Wuthering Heights, it's better if you know that you're reading about awful people, but I don't really think I know why it's so important in world literature, so might have to do some reading up on that. But yeah, the narration is okay. It was nice to revisit this way instead of rereading it again, which I had planned for sometime in the future anyways. So that's what I read in May. Let me know in comments how your May was, if you had an awesome reading month as well. Granted, mine was mostly rereading and audiobooks, but I really enjoyed the time I spent reading. Thank you all for watching and talk in comments. Bye bye.